Our next honoree is Victor Luckerson, a native of Montgomery and a graduate of the University of Alabama. Luckerson served as a technology and business reporter for Time magazine and later wrote for The Ringer. He then moved to Tulsa to work on the project which became the book which we honor today, Built from the Fire, the epic story of Tulsa's Greenwood district, America's Black Wall Street, which tells the story, the true story behind the community which became a potent national symbol of success and solidarity, and he weaves an epic tale about a neighborhood that refused more than once to be erased. Luckerson has recently served as author in residence at the University of Tulsa. Meanwhile, Built from the Fire has been named a top book of the year by the New York Times and by the Washington Post. And today we are pleased to present a 2024 Lillian Smith Book Award to its author, Victor Luckerson.
It's heavy, y'all. So, well, thank y'all so much for coming out. I should start by saying that this is my first book, and this is the first time I'm accepting an award for this book, so I'm really excited about that. That kind of means that I might be doing a lot of thank yous. The Oscar meeting about to come on. Y'all have to deal with that. So I have a lot of people to thank before I even get to the content of the book. First off, thank you so much to the Southern Regional Council, University of Georgia Libraries, the Decatur Library, Georgia Center for the Book, the Piedmont College, all the jurors who read all these books and sort of praised mine and Susan so much. Also, congratulations to my fellow honoree, Susan Crawford. I got a chance to read some of your books so far, really enjoying it, and I think both our books do a good job of capturing how government policy can undermine a community across generations. I also want to acknowledge that many people in the room who came for me in the audience tonight. Really excited y'all were able to come out here. Friends and family who came. Roll Tide to all those who celebrate. And then we got some of us in here. I want to especially thank my Aunt Claire and Uncle Stanley here in the front. My girlfriend Ariel, her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Felton. My parents, Wayne and Sherry Luckerson. A lot of y'all were here actually when my book came out in Tulsa last year. It's really exciting to have y'all here in the room tonight. My mom told me just a few days ago, she said, when you get this award, you're going to be looking at me when you get it. And so, looking at you right now, man. Thank you. I also want to make sure I acknowledge some very special folks who are in the audience tonight. So my book actually follows one particular family over the course of several generations, the Goodwin family. They moved to Tulsa in 1913. They still have a business on Black Wall Street today. The book sort of chronicles their lives from the 1870s all the way to present day. And two folks in their family here tonight in the audience, actually. And so I wanted to acknowledge Greg Goodwin. Could you raise your hand and be acknowledged? I got to interview Greg several times. Greg actually grew up on Greenwood Avenue itself in the 1960s and 70s. And, you know, part of my research, I did a lot of fact-checking about what I had written. And so in the book, I write about Greg's childhood home and how his mother was sort of welcoming to the whole neighborhood and, was really welcoming to the whole community. And I write about how, kids would come over there and they would be having this great time, having breakfast and then going off. And I said that she made some biscuits for all the kids. And so I showed Greg this before the book came out. He said, Mama didn't make no biscuits. You ain't gonna Aunt Jemima my mama. She ain't Jemima. We ain't doing this. And so that was an error I had in the book, but Greg caught that error for me, so I appreciate that, Greg. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge Miss Joanne Guilford. Miss Joanne, can you be acknowledged? So Miss Joanne is actually the daughter of Ed Goodwin Sr., who was a race massacre survivor as a high school student. Also the daughter of Gene Goodwin, who was a Greenwood educator and caregiver. Miss Joanne, I did a lot of interviews with Miss Joanne as well. And in my book, I have all these acknowledgments at the very end of sort of thanking a lot of folks, especially a lot of folks in the Goodwin family. And so when I would do these interviews with Miss Joanne, she would make me these sandwiches a lot. I would go to her house in Tulsa, she'd make me sandwiches and all this. And so in the acknowledgement, I said, Miss Joanne, thank you for the sandwiches. And she called me after and said, Victor, how are you going to have these people think all I ever did was make sandwiches? What are we doing here? And so in fact, Miss Joanne was an educator in Tulsa herself. She actually integrated Tulsa Public Schools as an educator, served on the Tulsa School Board, was a principal, she did it all. And she recently had a birthday. I'm not going to say her age, but she is 91 years old. There it is. All right. She's the leader of the Goodwin family. She's truly earned her stripes, and I'm so glad you're here tonight. So thank you for coming out, Miss Joanne. Thank you so much. And so in terms of my time here being able to talk to y'all a little bit tonight, I really wanted to take you through a brief journey through Greenwood, through the history. My book covers a lot of the story of this neighborhood, and I want to try to get through a little bit of it in the few minutes I have with y'all this evening. And I wanted to kind of start actually just by reading the opening of the book. This is the first chapter of the book, page 1. The first words I actually wrote when I decided to sort of start at the beginning and try to capture the world of Greenwood. They called it the Eden of the West. When boosters crafted tales of the land known as the Creek Nation, Indian Territory, and eventually Oklahoma, they wrote of fertile soil that could grow any crop, yielding shoulder-high acres of wheat and melons ready to burst in their succulent ripeness. They described a righteous realm where any newcomer would have equal chances with the white man, while those who remained in the old world, the Deep South, were slaves allowed to be killed at any time. Most important to James Henry and Carly Goodwin, they spoke of good schools for colored children, places where the seeds of prosperity could be sown in the one terrain that could not be burned, stolen, or erased by an interloper, the terrain of the mind. So these are the opening words to my book, Built from the Fire. And I've been reflecting on them a lot more as I've traveled around the country over the last year talking about this book and this history. Today I'm going to take us on a journey through the terrain of the mind, the place where movements both righteous and rageful begin, the place where school boards and libraries are currently battling over the future of American education, the place where the memory of Greenwood is flickering in and out of the national consciousness over the last 103 years. Let's go back to the beginning. In the early 1900s, Oklahoma was a place where black folks thought they could have a fresh start. As Jim Crow policy seized the Deep South with an ever-tightening grip, Oklahoma was seen as a promised land for black people. It was a place where 3/4 of black farmers owned their acreage, and more than 80% of black folks could read. Between 1900 and 1920, Oklahoma's black population tripled as people trekked to the state however they could, on crowded trains and weary-covered wagons. A few even came on foot. Greenwood became Oklahoma's brightest star of all. Imagine living in a place where most of your teachers at your high school had master's degrees. That was true in Greenwood. Imagine living in a place where black folks owned their land rather than renting it. That was true in Greenwood. Imagine living in a place where the defining measure of success was not money, but community involvement. That was true in Greenwood. If we were in the old Greenwood right now, I'd be talking to you not at Decatur Public Library, but at Mount Zion Baptist Church, which is built in the heart of the neighborhood with 70,000 bricks and countless numbers of prayers. After the talk, we'd have dinner at Susie Bell's Cafe at 106 North Greenwood Avenue, where Miss Bell's smothered chicken was a neighborhood delicacy. Once the meal was done, we'd catch a vaudeville show at the Dreamland Theater, where lions snaked around the block every weekend. And just maybe after that, we'd sling into a dim bar like the Zulu Lounge, where ragtime music dominated the piano, and a substance called chalk beer looked like grapefruit juice, but tasted like a Good Friday night. We'd meet women like Loula Williams, the famous amusement queen, who owned the Dreamland Theater, and a leopard print coat to match it. Men like A.C. Jackson, the genius doctor who the Mayer brothers called the most able Negro surgeon in America. Mabel Little, a beautician who was so good with hair, she even convinced a few men she could save their receding hairlines. And J.H. Goodwin, who helped build Tulsa's first black hospital. What a community contributes to you, Goodwin once wrote, can be measured only in terms of what you give back to that community. By 1921, Greenwood was filled with doctors, attorneys, writers, hoteliers, and shop owners. Here, the terrain of the mind was as verdant as a spring meadow. As Greenwood championed black independence, black entrepreneurship, and black strength. Mary Jones Parrish, a local typing teacher, was one of the first people to call it the Negro's Wall Street. But more than riches, what drew Parrish to Greenwood was the wonderful cooperation she observed among her people. But this terrain that Greenwood had cultivated, it was contested. The neighbor's success stirred something dark in the minds of many white Oklahomans. Oklahoma at its founding had declared that black ambition and intellect were at odds with the white agenda. As a rule, Negroes are failures as lawyers, doctors, and other professions. William Murray, a future governor of Oklahoma, said at the state's constitutional convention, "It is an entirely false notion that the Negro can rise to the equal of the white man." Not long after Murray's speech, the state chose to segregate schools, train cars, and phone booths. In Tulsa, even interracial baseball games were banned. Hateful rhetoric and dehumanizing laws inevitably lead to violence. It was true then, and it's true now. During the 1910s, lynchings became a regular occurrence across the Deep South and its warped appendage, Oklahoma. Race riots spread across the country during a period so bloody it became known as the Red Summer. The violence seemed to be closer to Greenwood with each passing year. In the nearby town of Wagoner, when a black woman was lynched and hanged on Main Street, the local white press declared that the lynching gave the community, quote, a peaceful and helpful appearance. Now, I want you to imagine you're on Greenwood Avenue. It's May 31st, 1921. The streets are again thronged with people, but the energy is different. Fear, anxiety, anger. A black shoeshine boy named Dick Rowland has been falsely accused of attempting to rape a white woman named Sarah Page. A salacious headline in the white newspaper reads, "Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator." Everyone in Greenwood and in White Tulsa has seen the story, and the accused boy sits in the county jailhouse. Where it is, a group of white men and women, even children, are headed to the jail to rip Rowland from his jail cell and lynch him. On the streets of Greenwood, men are gathering weapons and planning a march to the courthouse where they will protect the boy and face down any white man who gets in their way, no matter the cost. Ultimately, a group of about 75 armed black men marched to the courthouse that night. Many of the men were World War I veterans who had served their country abroad and returned to inequality at home. When they reached the jail, the black veterans demanded the release of Rowland, but the police refused. Soon a black soldier and a white man got in an argument over a gunshot went off, and all hell broke loose. During the night, black and white men shot each other through the streets of downtown Tulsa. The violence was brutal. One black man was dragged behind a car with a rope around his neck. Another was shot as he ran out of a downtown alley, then surrounded by a mob brandishing knives. Members of the white mob broke into an armory and attempted to seize a National Guard weapons. Many of them were deputized by the Tulsa Police Department. A white man named Laurel Buck recalled going into a police station and being told, quote, "Get a gun and get busy and try to get a nigger." The black men who escaped the initial shootout retreated back to Greenwood to defend their home, but the mob had something worse planned. At dawn the following morning, as many as 5,000 white Oklahomans invaded the Greenwood district, brandishing guns, kerosene, and matches. Fires were set systematically. A team of white men, some of them deputized by police, would enter a home and build a lock off the door if necessary. They smashed the valuables inside, wrenching open dresser drawers, tearing down window drapes. After gathering the bedding, wooden furniture, and other flammable items in the center of a room, the men doused the objects in kerosene. Then they lit a match. Each blaze conjured in the twilight carried its own awful story. Over the next several hours, white Tulsa laid siege to Greenwood, destroying more than 1,200 homes, raising hundreds of businesses, and killing as many as 300 people. The most harrowing statistic, there were 8 stillborn babies lost during the chaos of the invasion. The Tulsa Race Massacre, as the event was later known, was one of the worst acts of racial terror in the history of the United States. Now, if you're sitting here in this room with me today, chances are high that you've heard some of this story before. In recent years, the Tulsa Race Massacre has been featured in documentaries, 2 presidents visited Tulsa. It's become much, much more widely known across America. That's a good thing. It's good that we're beginning to honor this history, acknowledging what we haven't in the past. But I'm here to argue that Greenwood cannot be defined by these 36 hours of destruction. When I wrote this book, I wanted it to be a story about creation rather than destruction. And so by the time we finish talking today, when you think of Greenwood, you won't think of angry white men wielding torches and shotguns. You think of the people who called this place home and rebuilt their lives after a cataclysm. Despite the odds, Greenwood rebuilt. A barber took a chair out to the burned-out district as the rubble still smoldered, offering to cut hair. The Dreamland Theater became a makeshift amphitheater, showing films in the open air on muggy summer nights. Attorney B.C. Franklin was fielding off schemes to seize Greenwood land while working out of a tent he set up amidst the destruction, armed with a lone wooden desk, a few salvaged law books, and a single typewriter. Within weeks of the massacre, the neighborhood was a sea of white canvas tents. By Christmas, those tents had been replaced by hundreds of new buildings. By 1925, Greenwood was once again humming with hotels, storefronts, and the proud Dreamland Theater. Scars are there, but the neighborhood is impudent and noisy, W.E.B. Du Bois said when he visited. It believes in itself. Greenwood enjoyed a second heyday that stretched from the 1930s all the way to the 1950s. More than 400 businesses filled the district. Musicians from Count Basie to B.B. King to Etta James all performed at black-owned music venues in Tulsa. Steak and frog legs were a local delicacy. Women in pleated skirts and men in Bermuda shorts strutted down the stroll every Friday night. Residents proudly refer to Greenwood as Little Harlem and, yes, the Negro's Wall Street. Greenwood's story was Black America's story. Let me give you an example. So as part of my research, as I talked about earlier, I did a lot of investigation and research about the Goodwin family, and in particular Ed Goodwin Sr., who survived the race massacre as a teenager, went out to Fisk University, came back to Greenwood as a young man, and became an entrepreneur, owned lots of businesses. And as part of my research, I found out that Ed had been really involved in gambling and the numbers. Anybody here played the numbers, heard of the numbers? Anybody playing the numbers? Okay. You don't have to admit it if you played it. Somebody said, can't tell us, right? Yeah. So the numbers was this gambling pastime, kind of similar to the lottery today, but it was very much illegal in the 1930s. And Ed Goodwin Sr. ran the numbers in Tulsa. He also was involved in bootlegging and some other illegal activities. And so I had a very different image of him in my mind when I started learning about him, and I was really surprised by this. And I would always talk to my mom about my research as I was learning new things about the book. And so one day I called my mom and I said, Mom, I found all this stuff out about Ed Goodwin Sr. He was running the numbers. He was doing bootlegging. Isn't this kind of crazy, don't you think? And so my mom said, well, your granddad did the same thing in Alabama, just so you know. And so that was a really good lesson for me about not only my own family, but also just the route that black folks had to take to get to the middle class back then. If you're trying to get up that ladder back then, there was not going to be anybody giving you a red carpet, giving you any kind of leg up. You got to make your own way leg up. So Ed Goodwin made his leg up, and so did Sylvester Bender. So thank you for letting me know that, Mom. All right, back to the program. So despite Greenwood's ability to come roaring back from destruction, it could not escape the gears of so-called progress as the century wore on. In the 1960s, a slippery new term called urban renewal wormed its way into the government lexicon. The idea was to revitalize urban communities and provide better living conditions for residents. But in reality, neighborhoods like Greenwood were labeled as blighted, and the people living there were forced to move miles away to make room for new projects serving wealthier and whiter residents. Ed Goodwin's family was forced to leave their home on Greenwood Avenue, Greg's family, while the family newspaper office was demolished to make room for an interstate highway. By 1975, only half a block remained of what had once been the most prominent black business district in America. The terrain of the mind and the physical terrain are deeply intertwined. Without preserving the physical spaces that honor the past, it's easy for that past to slip out of living memory. That almost happened in Greenwood. For decades, the white press ignored every anniversary of the massacre. In the 1970s, writers who tried to uncover the truth like I have received death threats. Many survivors didn't tell their stories to their children about what had happened to them. Having been robbed of generational wealth, they didn't want to pass on trauma as an inheritance. But today, Greenwood still stands. And I want to tell you a little bit about how I first came into learning about this story and caring about it so much. So I should say that actually I used to live in Atlanta before starting on this project. I lived in Grant Park. And I was having lunch with a friend in Grant Park, 2017, I believe it was. And the film 12 Years a Slave came up in our conversation. Anybody here seen 12 Years a Slave? Some of y'all I'm sure have seen it. So my friend, who is about my age and from Montgomery, Alabama, like me, had never seen 12 Years a Slave, didn't want to see 12 Years a Slave. He was tired of only seeing black folks being brutalized in all these historical depictions. We're thinking about the ways that black people are often shown in Hollywood portrayals of history. It's either being whipped as slaves before the Civil War or sick by dogs during the Civil Rights Movement. So my friend said, I'm tired of all that stuff. And I asked my friend, have you ever heard of Black Wall Street? Example of us being successful. My friend had never heard of it. So this is before the Watchmen TV show, before the presidents came and all that stuff. And so based on that, my friend himself is a young black entrepreneur. So this idea that he had never even heard about this story of black success when he's trying to almost follow that path to Greenwood made me want to tell the story. And so I got to go visit Greenwood in 2018 on a reporting project for The Ringer, a website I used to be a journalist for. And so I got to go on the 97th anniversary of the race massacre, first time ever in Tulsa. And it was a really striking experience because so it was the anniversary of the massacre, and I expected there to be a lot of reverence for the destruction that had taken place there. You know, this is the anniversary of the event. And there was some. There was a vigil happening in Greenwood for massacre victims. There were maybe 20 or 25 people at this vigil. But in Greenwood, there are way more people going to this baseball game. There's a baseball stadium in Greenwood right now that was built about 10 years ago. And so there are hundreds of people streaming into the baseball stadium while there's about 25 of us acknowledging this has been a site of a mass murder. And so I think for me, both having seen my friend who knew nothing about the success of Black Wall Street, and then seeing that in Tulsa, the destruction of Greenwood wasn't being acknowledged, it really motivated me to want to tell a story that combined those two narratives. And so when you read my book, you learn about the tragedy and the destruction, but also about the joy and the excitement and the humor of being a person who grew up in Greenwood. So it's really been a blessing to be able to sort of try to marry those two narratives in this book. That's also why it's so long. It's such a big book. That's why it's so long. So I actually ended up, I went on those two trips. 2017, when learned about it with my friend, 2018 visited, and then in 2019, I decided to actually go all in. So in 2019 is when I left Atlanta. Summer 2019, or fall 2019, I guess it was. I quit my job at the Ringer. I made a black country music playlist, and I drove west to Tulsa. So Charlie Pride has a song called Oklahoma Morning. Great song, ever check it out. After I moved to Greenwood, I really learned that it's a place of contradictions these days. Part hallowed ground, part tourist destination. Part black business district, part gentrified playground. If you walk the streets today in Greenwood, you'll see all of these plaques on the street that denote businesses that were destroyed. Susie Bell's Cafe, the Goodwin building is listed, the Dreamland Theater. But a lot of these plaques actually abut new development. So there's like a plaque in front of the baseball stadium, a plaque in front of a luxury apartment. And so when you see that, I think it really shows some of the core hypocrisy that are playing out in terms of the development of this neighborhood. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that the people continue to defend Greenwood and honor the terrain they have left. Earlier, I've been talking about the Goodwin family a lot tonight, and I want to definitely point out the fact that they own a black newspaper, the Oklahoma Eagle, that's still there on Greenwood Avenue right now. They've been on the block for more than 100 years at this point. Ed's son, Jim, Miss Joanne's brother, is an 84-year-old attorney, the publisher of the paper, still working there every day. And Greg's sister, Regina, is now a senator. She was a representative, but she's now a state senator in Oklahoma, representing the Greenwood district. It's also important to point out there are actually two known living survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre still alive today. Leslie Benefo Randall and Viola Fletcher. They're 110 and 109 years old. So I've had an opportunity to interview them for my book and for my research. And I remember the first time I met them was about 4 or 5 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And I met them, and I had in my head I was like, almost like they're going to be porcelain and break if I get too close. And I remember I met up to Miss Fletcher. She said, "You can talk to me. I'm a real person. Talk to me, you know." And so they're very, very spry and like with it and everything. And there's been this reparations lawsuit going on for the last several years, since 2020. And I was at a lot of the hearings, and